Thank you again for joining us on this Saturday afternoon. We are the Photographic Arts Council, Los Angeles. I'm Paula Ely. For those who are new to PAC, we are an organization that's interested in creating conversation and community around fine art photography. Please check out our website at paclosangeles.com. You can sign up for our mailing list there. We have a quite robust calendar of events. It's all happening on Zoom these days, and all are welcome to join. So check us out, and also follow us on Instagram. You see our little Instagram handle below. It's Photographic Arts Council _LA. So do those things and join us for future programs. I want to give a special thank you to our members who have been supporting us and who have stuck with us during this weird year of not being able to gather together and in community, but we are doing our best to create that community here online, and we appreciate your ongoing attendance and support and being part of what we do here. The chat is open. Our presenters won't be attentive to the chat during the presentation. They're going to be focused on what they're doing, but we can talk amongst ourselves over there, and I will be sharing a few links. So you can look for them there. If you see the chat icon on your Zoom panel, just click it and you'll be able to see it. Or if it's distracting, you can just close it down. Okay, so we're very pleased today to have some visitors from Seattle, Michelle Dunn Marsh, Robert Wade, and Negarra Kudumu. They are each going to introduce themselves, so I'm not going to spend time on that. But I just want to sort of give a real quick introduction to how this talk came about. Michelle has a book publisher. Sorry, my vocabulary. Minor Matters publishes these wonderful books, and she did a project a few years ago called All Power: Visual Legacies of the Black Panther Party. And this exhibition was mounted in a couple of places, and obviously it's this book. I saw it at APAD a few years ago, and I was really struck by it. It's a really great combination of sort of historical photographs from the Black Panther movement 50 years ago now, kind of stunning. And contemporary work done by artists dealing with many of the same issues. So I did a great interview with Michelle back then. It's on the PAC website. I will link to it in the chat later after I get done talking, if you want to read more. And I will also share a link to Minor Matters so you can purchase the book if you like. Great. So sort of in this moment in the culture where we are sort of realizing our need to understand, you know, the history of the fight for Black liberation and problems that continue to plague us with systemic racism, I thought this was a perfect time. I immediately thought back to this project, and so I reached out to Michelle, and she was kind enough to put this illustrious group together to sort of revisit this project and talk to us today. So we're very pleased to, you know, for me, the arts are always a great point of entry to some of these conversations, and so we're very pleased to present this today. So with that, I am going to go away. I will come back at the end. We'll leave about the last 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle for further introductions and for the presentation. So thank you so much. See you later.
Thanks, Paula. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. It is a rare sunny day in Seattle, and those of you in Los Angeles, I understand you have sunshine all the time. So thanks for joining us, making time in your day, and nice to see some friends from New York, and for those we know and those we don't, welcome. We're going to each give just a brief introduction of who we are, and then I will spend about 15 minutes showing you work from the book as well as from the exhibitions. And then Robert and Negarra and I will have a little bit of a chat from the experience then and thinking about that in terms of the context of today. Before I go too much further, I do want to acknowledge the passing of John Lewis, and just really honor the legacy of a person who on so many levels was drawing attention to the issue of civil rights, and the importance of so much of the conversation that we'll be having and we'll be dealing with. So just want to make sure that for those who had not heard that news, that he did pass away. And so just really want to kind of honor him through this conversation today. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Michelle Dunn Marsh. I have been involved on the publishing and curation side of photography for the last 25 years. I am not a photographer. I really see my role in the field as connecting broader audiences to significant photography through publications, through exhibitions, and also very much through conversations such as the one that we're having. And so I've had the opportunity to do that through roles with the Aperture Foundation, with Chronicle Books in San Francisco. I've worked with a variety of commercial and nonprofit publishers as a designer and an editor. And 7 years ago, I started my own publishing imprint with Steve McIntyre called Minor Matters Books. And Minor Matters is a kind of a different model in publishing. We feel like it's really important for audiences to understand their role in the process of publishing. And so when we launch books to the public, there's a period of time where people are invited to purchase the book and be a part of publishing the book with us. So we only publish books that have an audience, that have a definable audience. This book was one of the shortest, All Power was one of the shortest periods of time that we had to sell 400 copies of the book. And we did that in 3 weeks, thanks to a lot of support from a lot of people. So all of our books, you'll see in the back of them names of people who bought the book in advance. And that's an important legacy for us, that witnessing the names of those people who have been a part of our publishing. I am going to be talking with you a lot, so I'm going to keep my introduction relatively short, and I would like to turn it over to Negarra Kudumu, who is the co-editor of the book, who will introduce herself and her place in the world, and then to Robert Wade.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As Michelle said, my name is Negarra Kudumu. I am based here in Seattle as well. I am manager of public programs at the Fry Art Museum here in Seattle. And in my independent practice, I function as a writer and scholar in connection with contemporary art, as well as a healer, working primarily in African-rooted spiritual traditions and healing modalities. So I sort of maintain this, not sort of, I maintain a crossroads practice that intersects often, many times throughout the day, healing and art. And it has been that intersection that has consistently led me to projects like this one that Michelle approached me about in late spring, I think, 2016. That's a funny story. I'm sure we'll get to it later on.
Yes, we will.
And offered me the opportunity not only to contribute to text, but to serve as co-editor, co-author of that book. And so this experience has been a catalyst for me both personally and professionally, and continues to be a very generous and very and be an experience full of many lessons, I should say. And, you know, I hadn't given it much consideration, but particularly in light of what we have all been dealing with, not just in terms of the pandemic, but specifically the protests that have happened in as a result of the killings of young Black people most recently this year. It is clear to me that the issues that were raised by the party at their inception, and the issues that they raised throughout their lifespan, and the issues that individuals and organizations that emerged as a result of the work of the Panthers continues to be salient today. And also, sorry, I'm supposed to give the floor to Robert Wade, photographer, who will tell you more about himself.
Thanks, Negarra.
Hi. Hi there. I'm a Los Angeles guy. I was born in LA in 1945 and lived there until 1971. I got my first serious involvement with photography in 1967 when I bought a single lens reflex camera and started shooting a lot. And I've shot pretty consistently throughout the 50 plus years. I have had other jobs. I taught community college psychology and Black studies for 20 years. I did a stint as an information systems project manager since I've been up here in Seattle. And since 2005, photography's been my sole source of earned income. And most of the money part of photography for me comes from commercial work, and my client base is almost exclusively cultural organizations in Seattle, like the Seattle Art Museum and the Henry Art Gallery, the Frye Art Museum, etc. And that's about it.
Do you want to tell us just a little bit about your first exposure to the Black Panthers before I get into a presentation?
Yeah, well, I first started hearing about the Black Panther Party back in the 60s, probably around 67. And one photograph I took that involved H. Rap Brown, who was another Black activist at the time, and Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, was in Los Angeles in 1967. And in 1969, I went to most of the public schools in LA. I went to LA City College, I went to Cal State LA, I went to UCLA. And I was basically the last couple of years from 67, when I got a bachelor's degree, to 69, dodging the draft by signing up for graduate school classes. And I finally got fed up with it. I sold everything, bought a one-way ticket, and went to Copenhagen to hang out in Europe through the rest of the war, if necessary. And at that point, I met a person named Connie Matthews, who was a Black Panther organizer in Northern Europe, in addition to being an executive secretary of a UNESCO cultural organization. And that led me to a deeper involvement with the party because she told me about the Pan-African Cultural Festival. And a couple of the photographs in the book are from that festival. So in 1969, I went down to Algiers for the Pan-African Cultural Festival and came back. And at the end of the summer, as it turned out, as fate would have it, I'm maybe the luckiest guy in the world in terms of the draft, because my mother sent me a letter and telling me that I'd gotten a 4F, physically unfit for duty, and I still never had a physical. So I'm not exactly sure why that happened, but I did come back home at the end of that summer.
Fantastic. As is often the case in these circumstances, I learn new things every single time. So with that, I'm going to try and get this presentation pulled up. So I'm going to take about the next 15 minutes to show you some of the work. I've tried to make the captions large enough so that everyone can see the work of the photographers. I'm not going to talk about every single piece. I'll talk a little bit about the project, but we are happy to answer questions in the Q&A period if there's particular works that you're interested in. So let me try at this point to see if this is going to work. All right, can everyone see what I see, which is the title? All right, thanks so much. So a little bit of my point of background where I had the opportunity to be connected with the Black Panthers. I was working for the Aperture Foundation and running an outreach program called Aperture West. So in 2006, I had the opportunity to attend the 40th anniversary of the founding of the party, and had developed some youth programming along with SF camera work to connect young people to some of the elders of the party. And Stephen Shames, who was a photographer that Aperture had published, and we were publishing a book of his work to time with the 40th anniversary, and Perkle Jones and Ruth Marion Baruch. I had seen a number of photographers, Stephen Shames being probably the most prominent. I'd seen their photographs and then later discovered the work of Howard Bingham, but it was my first exposure to an incredible group of people. I had the good fortune of actually being driven around Oakland by Bobby Seale, hearing stories from him directly about the early days of the party. And so 2 years later in 2008 was the 40th anniversary of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. And the formation of the Black Panther Party in Seattle also timed with the formation of the Black Student Union at the University of Washington. And the University of Washington was so afraid that students would become interested in the history of how the Black Student Union was formed, which came out of a takeover of the university president's office, that they decided it would be less controversial to talk about the Black Panther Party than talk about the formation of the Black Student Union. And so I was involved in bringing this exhibition to Seattle and also developing programming around it. And as a result of that, I stayed connected to and interested in and learning more about the legacy of the party. And I was approached in 2015 with a project of someone who had made portraits of rank and file members of the party in the early 2000s to mid 2000s and had done some incredible interviews, but the photographs were not particularly strong. And I started thinking about, from what I had learned essentially over almost a decade of research around the party, I started thinking about what have I not seen? What is the book that I want to hold that I haven't seen yet? And I realized that I was particularly interested, given the very strong graphic nature of Emory Douglas's work and the visible components of the strength of the party. I had never seen anything that really engaged with contemporary African-American artists that addressed that or that sort of spoke to that at all. And so I was curious to see what that could look like. And because I wasn't sure if this was a good idea or a bad idea, I wrote artists that I knew. I wrote people that I was friendly with so that they could tell me if this was a stupid idea and not to follow through with it, or if it was an interesting idea and if they would be willing to participate. And so I originally contacted about 30 primarily photographers and other contemporary artists. 17 of them ended up actually submitting work for the book. The first person to respond was Carrie Mae Weems. This is one of Robert's photographs. Carrie, I had worked with her on a book at Aperture, and she said, this is a great idea, and you should be in touch with Renee de Guzman, who was the curator at the Oakland Museum of California. And I was like, great, Renee's working on a show. I don't have to do this book. That's fantastic. And I spoke with Renee, and he said, yes, we're doing the 50th anniversary show, but we don't have the time to put together a catalog. And there were a number of artists who crossed over between, including Carrie, Hank Willis Thomas, that he was featuring. And so he said, why don't you do the book that you were thinking about as a complement to our exhibition, and we'll sell it at the museum. I was like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. But I was hesitant. And of course, when you set deadlines for people, everyone said, yes, oh, this is a great idea. And then the deadline came for people to actually submit work. And I only had, I think, 3 people who had submitted photographs. One of them was Robert, one of them was Kambui Olujimi. And I just thought, I'm not sure if I can pull this off. I talked to Negarra about writing, and she said, yes, I'm interested in writing. And I just didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I had the energy to pull it together. And the first week of July, a number of things happened that have been emotional for me to revisit in light of what has been happening this year. In 1 week, Alton Sterling Philando Castile were both killed at the hands of the police, and that was documented through video. And 5 police officers were killed by a sniper at a vigil in Dallas, Texas. And I had this moment of paralysis of what is happening? How, as I'm studying the history of this party and the efforts from 50 years ago, how can this still be happening? And I felt really helpless. And I realized that the one thing that I could do was to try and move this book forward. There followed another 2 weeks where I started by calling Negarra and saying, will you not only write an essay, will you co-edit the book with me? I need you. And being the professional powerhouse that she is, she said, yes, of course. And then I called her a few days later and said, I just don't have the energy to do this. And she said, that's okay. You need to take care of yourself. We have to prioritize our survival first and foremost. Take care of yourself. And then I called her another 3 days later and said, I can't live with myself if we don't try to do this. And so it was that third time we were sitting at a place called Marjorie's in Seattle. And I was showing her the work I had. Kambui Olujimi had also spent an hour on the phone with me, and he said, we have to do this. You have to do it. Follow up with everyone. I'll follow up with them. We have to move this forward. And so I was sitting at a bar showing Negarra what I did have. And the owner of the restaurant walked past us and she said, I don't care what it takes. You two have to finish this. Do you remember that, Negarra? That Donna was standing behind us and saying.
So I barely remember that. I do remember her being like, it's way more vague in my mind. So I remember her definitely encouraging us. But I don't remember those exact words. But clearly that's what got us to like get ourselves together. So right on.
Yes, cocktails sometimes provide a little liquid courage in those moments. One of the things that evolved from this, a number of things that were super important, is one, the response was intergenerational. So we have people in this project from 20 years of age to people in their 70s. About close to half of the 17 artists featured in the book were alive as adults during the active years of the party from 1966 to 1982. The other half were not. They were not born yet. And so it became this interesting intergenerational conversation through the artwork. We also asked artists to choose work that they felt represented particular elements related to the party. And in some cases, they chose things that I knew about and was interested in. And in other cases, they chose work that I had never seen. And so it was also a way to learn about work produced by people whose careers I had followed, but I had no idea. Micheline Thomas is one that comes to mind. I had no idea about this series she had done from FBI Portraits. What that also presented to Negarra and I was an interesting challenge from a visual perspective, because often when you're developing a visual book, you have all of the visuals and you've developed a sequence that's come from that. In this case, the visuals were coming in and we had to develop what the book was going to be from those materials kind of after the fact. And we turned to the 10-point platform and program as guidance and inspiration for that. So the book starts with works by artists who were adults during the active years of the movement. And then it moves into sort of 3 loose thematic sections related to education, police brutality, and the power of determining one's own destiny. And continuing to think back on those elements and how relevant all 3 of them remain today. In the fall of 2017, I gave a copy of the book to Stephen Kasher, who is a member of APAD, had a gallery in New York for many, many years, and has had a long interest in civil rights and has also published his own books related to photography of the civil rights movement. And he was very moved by the work and said, we've got to show this in New York, and in fact offered his own gallery as a space to be able to do that. And I said, you know, a number of the artists have other representation in New York. That would be tough, but thank you for your interest. And he said, no, we should get this at APAD. We should try to show this at APAD, which was really kind of a dream come true. But we went from intending this to be a small exhibition at Photographic Center Northwest in Seattle to what became a traveling exhibition that within a matter of weeks, it was mounted in New York at APAD for 4 days. Within 3 weeks, it was then on view in Seattle. And later that fall, it then also was on view at Central Washington University in Eastern Washington, which was a particularly important environment for it to be seen because it was quite a homogenous audience that was seeing the work in a rural part of Eastern Washington. And the opportunity then to, a couple of years later, revisit, add artists. We added 6 artists, including some people like LaToya Ruby Frazier, who were on my initial list, but I just hadn't been able to hear back from her. And then people like Sadie Barnett, who Negarra and I met when we went to Renee's exhibition in Oakland and saw her work there. Chris Graves, Weta Catherine Bryson from Seattle, Christopher Paul Jordan from Seattle, and Jasmine Brown. And so it was an opportunity to think about the work and now explore it in a tactile manner and have the opportunity to share it in a number of environments that were predominantly Caucasian. And so we also had an opportunity to really think through, which was something that Negarra and I spent a lot of time talking about with the book, the importance of informing without explaining. And to understand that there are broad audiences, large audiences within the African-American community, the Latino community, who have a great knowledge of the history of the Black Panthers. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a mainstream audience carries that same knowledge, but we didn't want to create something that only spoke to ignorance. We wanted to create something that honored people who have been invested in liberation, in the civil rights movement, and who could read something with nuance and intelligence and make space for people who might find that slightly unfamiliar to go out and learn more, but to not feel that we had to explain things to them. So these are some installation views from APAD in New York. When the show was mounted in Seattle, we added the work of Jasmine Brown, who was a Tacoma local artist. And the piece was a mural that she had created that is life-size of her son, Jamin. And it was a series she did in honor of Trayvon Martin, and it's called Teen Wearing Hoodie. And so she had teen wearing hoodie, playing the saxophone, teen wearing hoodie. This piece is teen wearing hoodie, reading pedagogy. This piece was installed in a very highly trafficked area on Capitol Hill on the 12th Avenue. And within a matter of days of, actually this first piece was up for almost the run of the exhibition. So it was up for a month and a half. And on the last day of the show, the piece was decapitated. The head was ripped off of the piece. It was on the wall of PCNW for almost 4 or 5 hours before I had discovered this and removed the piece. When I removed the piece and contacted the artist, I learned that most of the installations she had done from this series had met with a similar fate. This is in 2018. And so PCNW mounted a community response where we reinstalled 12 of these pieces along 12th Avenue. The only 2 that were not similarly damaged were on the interior of buildings. So over a period of between 2 weeks and a year and a half, all of the pieces have been removed that were mounted on the exterior of buildings as they were originally intended. And we can talk more about that if people have questions. These last few are the installation at the Sarah Spurgeon Gallery at Central Washington University. A professor at Central Washington, Mark DeCinas, had seen this work at APAD and invited us to bring the show to the university, give a lecture, and engage with the student and faculty and public population there. And with that, I will open it up to a conversation with Negarra and Robert. So I just want to start with a kind of open question to both of you, coming both from a writing and photographic standpoint. What did you each find important about this project when you first learned of it?
Well, I was interested in the idea of seeing how it would turn out, seeing how it would evolve. And one point that you made earlier was kind of the most salient thing for me. The artists who were there at the time combined with the artists who were influenced by the time but weren't there at the time.
Negarra, thank you, Robert.
I think for me, the initial compulsion to want to be a part of this project was because it is one of a few, perhaps even the only, that focuses on and gives primacy to the power of the aesthetic that Black Panther established, and that continues to be a source of inspiration, not to mention all of the instances in which it's downright just copied blatantly.
Right.
The style that they established is very clearly, or was very clearly, the street style of African Americans in the urban United States. But it was also a style that was very intentionally put together to relay a sense of importance, seriousness, power, and a refusal to back down. And so in thinking about the title, which very clearly sets out what the book is about, visual legacies, immediately what people, and Michelle and I have had numerous conversations about this, when people think of the Black Panthers, the first thing that they're one of two things that they think about: the actual panther, which was their but also the traditional black leather jacket, the beret, and the fro. That's what they think about. That style was timeless then, is timeless now, but it relays a very specific message about what these group of Black youth were about, and in what they intended to do. And so for me, it made total sense, because those images that people would immediately recall when the moment they saw the book would let people know precisely what it is that we intended to talk about and to do with that title, which for me, which was yet another way in which we could add to the perpetuity of an already timeless and already continuously important legacy. Not to mention what Michelle has already said about the salience of the particular time, which, you know, in 2016, just 4 years ago, we were finding ourselves again dealing with mourning, bemoaning the death of more Black youth in this country. And so for me, though, it was really another instance of where we started with the image, and it was the image that guided us through The image was the initial idea and the initial impulse.
I'm so glad that you have emphasized youth, Negarra, because I think one of the elements in developing the exhibition, more so even than when we were working on the book, and perhaps that was also part of the evolution of demonstrations through Black Lives Matter, was the realization that the Black Panther Party is never described as a youth movement, when in fact, almost everyone who was involved with it was under the age of 25. And the significance of it being a youth movement is that many of the leaders who were not killed at the time or killed subsequently or jailed indefinitely are with us. And we have the benefit of firsthand witness, of firsthand testimony, of lessons learned, of opportunities to consider what has changed, what has not changed. And it hit me in such a powerful way that I've never read anything that describes the Black Panther Party as a youth movement. And perhaps some of that has to do with the success of their visual presentation of themselves from a place of power.
I think so. I think also, though, it is also evidence of the way in which Black youth are unfortunately always treated as older than they are.
Very good point.
The way in which that has real consequences for Black life. There is a history, and related but slightly off topic, but I'll be brief. There is a history in this country and other places, but particularly poignant in this country, of treating Black youth from the moment that they are toddlers able to walk and begin to talk as older than they are, and thus being able to deal with more than what a quote unquote regular, which we know is synonymous with white, child would be able to bear. And so I think it's a very strange mix of the two. I think when you are talking, depending on your audience, when you are talking to Black and brown communities who understand that dynamic because they experience it, we can really and truly look and see and say, oh, those were children.
Right.
You know?
Right. Right.
You can really and truly see that. And I mean, I think what was poignant for me particularly is that in the lead up to me writing my essay, I went back and watched the documentary on Fred Hampton, which, if I remember correctly, is available on YouTube, though I'm not sure. I think it is on YouTube. And I don't think Fred Hampton was even 25.
He wasn't. He was younger than that. I think he was 22.
Exactly. And the young man that was also killed just before he was not even 21.
Right.
And so, again, we are looking at, we're looking at the ways in which Black people pay very dearly for expressing their humanity and daring to, rather than asking, daring to expect others to treat them as the humans that they are in the moment, But again, back to that image, the image is very continues to be poignant, though precisely for that reason. You know, whether the viewer is looking at them as, you know, these seasoned strategic calculating adults, or whether they understand that this was a youth movement filled with the vigor and the excitement and the spirit of adventure that youth movements often are filled with, that in terms of its thrust maintain similarities with other youth movements that were happening in other places. I'm specifically referencing the youth that were involved in 1968 in Paris and those protests. You start to see, good, bad, or indifferent, how poignant and how singular the Panthers were and still continue to be. I think it's an interesting bridge to the art world, because we can also see certain tinges of this in the art world, particularly with, you know, the way in which art by African American artists, but also artists of the African diaspora, also African artists operating on the continent of Africa, how it is the thing, how people are all interested in it now, the way in which people want to consume it, but perhaps also to a certain extent, though this is perhaps not seen or talked about so much, the way in which people would like to control it as well. There's some interesting parallels there that I find, sort of looking with 2020 vision, pun intended, back on 2016. But again, I'm so proud that we chose the perspective of that visual one, because there is something about images, and this continues to be my fascination with photography. There is something about images, be it a still photograph or a moving image, that registers indelibly on the brain in a way that even text cannot.
No, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because of course that's a lot of the work that I have been doing in the last 4 years relates to that importance of visual literacy and remapping people's brains, right, with imagery that they may not have been familiar with. I do also just want to say briefly, though this is a conversation that's focused on the visual, we had some amazing pieces of original scholarship. Negarra's piece focusing on aspects of education through, and the legacy of education through the Black Panther Party. Deb Willis conducting, again, original scholarship, interviewing her husband, Hank Thomas, on the free medical clinics. Renee de Guzman writing about the history in Oakland. So it really, for me, looking back on this, it just shows how much more work there is to do, because there was such a fountain of interest and of scholarship that came so quickly. So Paula, I know we're on Q&A time. What have you got for us?
I'm back. Thank you all so much. I wonder if you could put some slides back up, since we're lucky enough to have Robert with us. Do you think we could maybe have a look at a couple of those images and get some backstory and some reflections perhaps on these images?
Robert, do you want to start talking about the Pan-African Conference while I get us there?
Yeah, in 1969, in Algiers, there was a Pan-African Cultural Festival. And my recollection is that about 90 countries were represented there. And the Black Panthers had a cultural center there. And that photo was from inside the cultural center. And if you can go to I think it's an earlier photo, the outside of the cultural, of the African American.
It's in the book, but it's not in.
Oh, it's not not here, okay. Sorry. Yeah, so.
But can you talk about my favorite girl?
Yeah, I finally went back through enough negatives to know that that wasn't just California. That was in Oakland, and that was a rally. I, when going through the negatives fairly recently, I came to realize that the keynote speaker at that rally was Angela Davis. And that little girl or boy, I don't know if it was a girl or a boy for sure, but that little person with the fierce look was carrying that big sign relating to the Chicago 8 trial that Bobby Seale was one of the victims of.
That's right. And then we have, of course, beautiful Connie.
Yeah, Connie Matthews unfortunately passed away some time ago. She was originally from Jamaica, and apparently she got fed up and ran away from home at 17 and went to London. And I'm not sure how she managed to do it, but she ended up graduating from London School of Economics. And when I met her, she, again, was the executive secretary of a UNESCO folk music organization that moved from city to city every 2 years. So those 2 years were spent in Copenhagen. And she was also an organizer for the Black Panther Party. And she was really talented because she could get thousands of people on the street in Copenhagen, Stockholm, for anything related to the movement, if it was required. She was a really fascinating person. And the photo was taken, it was a gloomy situation that night. I think that explains the expression on her face, because that was the night that we heard that Bobby Seale had been arrested in the United States.
So how did you come to be in all of these places, and in what capacity were you photographing?
Again, I was in Europe that summer as a draft dodger, basically. I didn't want to enroll in classes again because I was pretty much done with school at that time. And I wasn't going to the war. There was no chance. And so I decided that it would be maybe best for me to just bail out of the country for a while and stay out as long as necessary. It turned out it was only required to be 3 months, but I was pretty open-ended at that time. And I had been, by 1969, I'd been taking a lot of photographs for a couple of years. I had a couple of cameras, and a couple of lenses. And I had a Euro pass, which I don't know if people are familiar with, but it allowed me to go anywhere in Western Europe for 90 days once I paid for the pass. So I went to a lot of countries in Western Europe that summer.
There's a question here from one of our viewers asking if you had much cross-pollination with other photographers working around the Black Panther movement at the time. And Stephen Chambers. None.
Zero.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's another question here for Michelle about your curating choices. Like, how did you decide what to include here? Uh-oh. Have we lost Michelle? I think that we have, because her screen is gone and she's gone.
You know what? She might have gotten a phone call, because sometimes when you get a phone call, it kicks
it
you out.
knocks you off. Okay.
She'll probably try to join as best as she can.
She'll be back.
Yeah.
She'll be back. We don't have images. So, well, Negarra, maybe you can answer that. Can you talk about the curating choices, about sort of how you decided what to include?
Well, Michelle made a good point earlier, which was the intergenerational piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was important to have a wide range, age-wise, of individuals who had been impacted intellectually, artistically by the work of the Black Panther Party. It was particularly important, as Michelle said, to have individuals who were adults during and experienced that movement. But also, thinking about Robert, who traveled to the places where they were, was, you know, actually on the scene and experiencing it and in conversation with several of the key participants at the time. That was very important. For artists operating today, many of them, particularly, and I'd like to mention here, Ayanna V. Jackson, who is based in Johannesburg, and McCoy Ali Barnes, who's based here in Seattle. Both of those individuals come from families, activist, intellectual families. And so there is a history of activism and a history of advocacy within their families that has naturally, in many ways, been represented, in some cases explicitly, other cases implicitly, within their work. And so it was important to have individuals such as those in the work, in the book as well. And then there were some artists where it's simply you took a look at the work and you knew that it had a place and it needed a place in the book. There is a piece that's particularly poignant by a DC-based artist by the name of Ingina Jarvis. It is a leather sculptural piece called E Gun Gun. It is a play on words between, obviously, the word gun, but specifically the Yoruba concept of the collective ancestor. And that work was sort of a later addition to the book, but proved to be absolutely perfect because of that double entendre piece, because of the reference to ancestors and the way in which, particularly within Yoruba theology, ancestors and many other African-rooted traditions as well, but the way in which ancestors lift us up and our sources of support, but also quite frankly, the radical militant aspect of the Panthers too, who believed very openly in protecting their communities and defending their communities in a number of ways, but very openly and very clearly with the use of force if necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a series of decisions like that. I can't at all say, particularly given some of the fits and starts that we had at the very beginning, that it was like this organized, super organized process where we knew in advance who was going to do what, who was going to do this, who was going to bring this. It really came together very organically and through a series of conversations, ongoing conversations between myself and Michelle, but also ongoing conversations between Michelle, Renee, who we ended up doing a tour of the exhibition. That's where we met Sadie Barnett, whose father was active in the party. So it was really sort of organic the way that it came together, and then certain opportunities to include works just sort of appeared to us, and it was like, okay, we absolutely need to include those works.
Michelle's trying to get back on, so I'm resending her the link. She's stuck. So I'm sorry that we don't have the images to look at there. It's I really recommend the book. There are some questions about, I mean, this exhibition happened a few years ago. Have there been any conversations about traveling it further or mounting it again or refreshing or?
Well, you know, Michelle has always sort of functioned, where the books are concerned, function from the perspective of, if there is a real concrete reason to release a second edition of a book, there will be she would totally be open to it. And so that being said, we sort of don't know what the world holds for art at this moment, because we're all we're all still in this quarantine environment. And so if there is an opportunity to present the show again, I know that Michelle would be open to it. I would certainly be open to it. As always, it's a question of venue and material resources to make it to make it happen. So if any of you all have any ideas and any connections in terms of securing the right kind of place. Certainly once things are reopened art-wise, it would be something that I think Michelle and myself, as well as the artists with, whose work is within the show, would happily consider.
There's a question for Robert here. Are there any contemporary photographers whose work you believe is presenting the current movement in an interesting way?
There are a number of people, I can't tell you any names off the top of my head, but there are a number of people that I've been following on Instagram, yes. And I could send you an email with those names if you want to send that out.
Sure.
And while I have the floor for a second,
Yes,
I do
please.
want to say one thing about Michelle. I think she said that I was the first person to respond and provide material. And I have learned, I've known Michelle probably for maybe 15 years now. Whenever Michelle asks me to do something, I say yes. And it always works out great.
I would agree with that, except Zoom calls apparently, because she's struggling. She's out there all by herself. Are there other questions? There was a question about the symbol. I don't know if any of you know the answer to this. If you have any knowledge of the origin of the symbol of the Black Panthers?
So yeah, I saw that question earlier. So I don't know the specific origin as per the history of the Panthers. What I can say is that, a panther is a specific kind of leopard. It is indigenous to several countries several regions throughout the world, particularly the African continent. And it is considered an animal totem in many spiritual traditions, namely the Yoruba, which I mentioned before, but also several others. The choice of a panther to represent this organization does not surprise me, particularly when you look at the behavioral traits of the animal. It is a voracious eater, but also a skilled and very calculating and very stealth hunter. And so the choice in considering that, and also knowing what it is that I know about that animal as an animal totem in various African, but also Mesoamerican spiritual traditions, the choice of that animal as that to represent what they're about was spot on. It was perfect. But Michelle, now that you're back, maybe this is something that you can ask. Paula was reiterating a question that was posed earlier about the story behind the emblem, the Black Panther as the emblem from the organization. And I don't know the specifics of that choice, but perhaps you may have some information on that.
It was used, I want to say it's Loudoun County, Alabama, I think. I might be misremembering, but it was used for a poster to get people to vote. And Bobby and Huey saw it and were like, "Oh yeah, that's what we're talking about." And they liked the idea of, a panther being essentially like wanting to be left alone. But if you back us into a corner, we're gonna come after you. We're not instigating trouble. We're responding to it. And they had seen that poster, I think from a SNCC contact, and liked the look, and then Emory refined what was on that poster to be the logo that we see now.
That's the story that I heard either Bobby or Huey say, that the panther was not necessarily aggressive unless you messed with it.
Yeah.
And then it would defend itself fearlessly.
Yes.
Yes. I actually watched, Agnes Varda did a film. It's called Black Panthers. I just put a link in the chat. I just saw it on Vimeo. It's about 30 minutes. So if those who are interested want to check it out. And she opens with about what the Black Panther is an animal that is not aggressive, but will defend itself fearlessly. So that's all lining up. Are there any final questions? We're actually, it's 4:02. Let me see. Michael's saying, can I see?
So Michelle, while you were gone, someone asked if we were going to bring the exhibition to California, and I told them they just need to find us a space and some money.
That is a perfect answer. The exhibition certainly, resonated with all of the audiences who did see it. So we would be happy to, it would be a little tough to get the gang back together, but I'm sure we could find a way.
Oh my gosh. Well, that actually went by really quickly, and there's a lot of really interesting work in the book and in the exhibition. I encourage you to check it out if you can. I will, one more time, I'm sorry, I'm mousing around here while trying to talk. I will put the link one more time to the book into the chat so you can see, you can check it out. Any final thoughts to leave us with?
Know your history. There's so much more on so many levels within the art that we experience within this complicated country that we are in. And yeah, that would be mine. Negarra, Robert?
Well, you opened with John Lewis, and I'll close with John Lewis. In 2017, he was in a conversation at the Seattle Art Museum that I attended, and there is a video of that on YouTube. So anybody that's interested in finding out more about John Lewis can refer to that.
I think for me, thinking about the work that I do in my healing practice and working with, people who have been active in the protests, is that, again, thinking about the power of the image, knowing how to use it and when to use it. The Black Panthers achieved everything that they achieved in an age where social media did not exist. There was not this rapidity of information. There was not this need to constantly circulate information about, in the way that we are seeing today, such graphic information about the death of young Black and brown people. There was a focus there that came from a very strategic use of the technology that they had at the time. And so I would urge for anyone who is active in any way in the present day movement, that if there's anything that you take away from how strategic the Panthers were about their visual representation, is that there's a lot that can be done with a little. There's a lot that can be done with a little. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it there.
Fair enough. Well, thank you all so much for being with us on your Saturday afternoon and for taking this time to share your story with us. I wish I had some great wisdom. I say buy the book, learn more. I have to say I was really, I was not born when the Black Panthers were formed, but shortly thereafter. And I was really woefully unaware of really what they were about. I had an image of, Black berets and trench coats and guns. And I didn't really understand what the Black Panthers were all about. So I really urge people to watch the videos, to watch the book, to read the books, to learn about what was really behind this movement. It's just another step in coming to terms with our history. So Thank you all so much for being here, and we'll see you later.
Thank you so much, Paula, for having us. This has been great. Big
Thank
thanks.
you so much.
Thank you to PAC Los Angeles. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thanks for joining.